Welcome to another episode of Brainstorm Black. Today's episode is very important. We're talking about criminal justice. I'm going to read a couple of things for you. This is from the Sentencing Project. In 2016, Black Americans comprised 27% of all individuals arrested in the United States, double their share of the total population. African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested. Once arrested, they are more likely to be convicted. Once convicted, they are more likely to experience lengthy prison sentences. Now let's bring that home. In the film Black Bodies, local judge Laura Livingston had something to say about disparity in the criminal justice system. Listen to this.
I do think that we can look statistically at how we as a Black community have been treated in the criminal justice system, economically, in positions of power, in elected positions. I mean, you name the system, and I can probably find pretty good statistics that demonstrate disparity, because disparity is real, disparity exists, and we have to figure out ways to combat disparity when we root it out and recognize it is there.
Well, my guest today has a very visionary, forward-thinking idea about addressing some of these very disparities. Welcome to the show, Darrell Malone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Darrell, I don't even know, I'm excited to jump into this because I'm so inspired by it. I was looking at your website. I want to get into what your project is. Go ahead and tell us what it's called.
So the project is the Tubman Project.
The Tubman Project, as in Harriet Tubman.
Exactly.
Okay. We're going to talk about that because it is fascinating. First, I want to know a little bit about you. Tell us who Darrell is.
So I'm a computer scientist by, I guess, training. Self-taught, so I kind of taught myself just writing initially video games and things like that. After a while, I started getting into doing web development, and after a while of doing that, doing some kind of freelance work and everything like that, I kind of caught the cryptocurrency bug. I was working with some startups that were kind of in that space, and so that brought me into a whole lot of other different communities in terms of the computer science field. Started getting interested in some other ways of thinking about policy and ways of thinking about how you can make change in the world through technology. And that's something that I continue today. I always like to be on the cusp of new things that are being developed and discovered, and keeping myself circulating around in that world.
Yeah, I've seen your Facebook posts, and you post that. I have Bitcoin. I have some Bitcoin, and I'm pretty excited about that. I think right now it's at maybe $33, which is fine. I don't know what I'm doing, but I have dabbled in that a little bit. So I find all that fascinating. Why have you always been interested in that sort of thing? Technology, computer science, all that?
Yeah, definitely. I started writing code when I was in middle school. So this has been it's been my life, pretty much.
Did your teachers, did your schools promote that? Did they help you and support that?
To an extent, probably. I mean, when I was in high school, I think that was the first time when I had an actual programming class, which was more or less, they put everybody into a room, sat you in front of computers, and most of the time people just played games.
Right.
The teacher just, sat. It was one of those types of classes.
Yeah.
But it was just a passion for me. It was just something that I was really into. I loved the idea of being able to create worlds. I was always the type of kid that was, drawing different inventions and things like that. And so being able to get my first 3D engine and make things collide with each other and do things was just, that was heaven for me.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. And did you, how long have you been in the Austin area?
So I lived in Austin for about 8 years total. These days, I kind of float around a little bit. I've been doing quite a bit of traveling. Consider myself a digital nomad now.
Nice.
So yeah.
Okay. So this topic, criminal justice, it's a big one when we think about, specifically when we think about Black people and Black communities. As you just heard the judge say, there is a definite disparity. And those statistics that I just read, they blow my mind. I mean, there's such a huge difference between Black people and white people in what happens in criminal justice. So you have come up with this idea to help certain groups with this. And I just want you to jump in and tell us what the Tubman Project is, how you came up with this idea, but yeah, then just get into what it is.
Absolutely. So in terms of where, excuse me, in terms of where I got the inspiration to do it, I've had my own, experience with the disparity of how criminal justice is arrayed between whether you're Black or whether you're white or Native American or what have you. I always tell people I've had guns pointed at me only 3 times in my life, and it's always been police officers, and it doesn't matter where I am. It could be it's always been like either my own neighborhood, around my house. One time it was my grandmother's house. I had, they came into my backyard and wondering what I'm doing there and things like that.
We just saw that on a national level with someone who was in his backyard.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, it's luckily I'm still here. I haven't had, was able to de-escalate all those situations successfully and everything like that, but just as easily could not have been, and even if somebody had just decided, maybe I said something wrong or looked the wrong way, now they're bringing me through jail, and now it could be any number of things could happen because of that. So with just that experience, this is just something that's happened just multiple times during my life, just growing up.
And I'm going to cut you off because I never want to gloss over this. When that happens to you as a Black man, what do you feel? During or after or even now, when you think about that, what does that feel like?
I mean, it's just you're kind of powerless at that point, right? If you're unarmed generally, you're outnumbered, a lot of times it's dark and you're just, what do you do? Like it's, this is a person who legitimately has the right to kill you and nothing will happen,
right.
And you have no recourse.
I can't imagine it. I'm a Black woman, never had a gun pulled on me. Certainly, there's deference to police officers, and I can't imagine being in that situation, especially knowing what we know now and seeing the video that we've seen, that at that moment, it can very well be life and death for someone. So I'm sorry you've experienced that. And thank you for sharing that, I really want to understand what that feels like, and I want other people to understand what that feels like if it were their son or daughter in that situation. So thank you. So continue with your project.
Well, so as I kind of started getting more involved in politics and things like that, being in Austin, I started getting involved in different causes that were going on here and trying to understand the system more. And, it was kind of right before the election. So I remember Trump had just started campaigning, and this was maybe early that summer. And I had just gotten back to Austin. I was living in Lubbock for a while, and I was like kind of getting my feet on the ground and everything like that. And I was still very politically active. This was, all of these videos had been coming out even during the Obama administration of just all of the violence and the killings and everything like that. And I remember seeing how much Trump was covered in the media, and whether that was the, mainstream media or whether it was digital media. He basically had carte blanche. He had constant coverage 24/7, and I was just like, he's gonna win. There was no question in my mind. Like it was just dead obvious. And so I kind of determined right then that something had to be done to solve this. me being a technologist and someone who's always had an interest in artificial intelligence and in the idea of being able to create things like that, that seemed like a natural solution to me. So I started doing some research, some reading, and trying to see how all of that would work. And then finally, actually, I ended up in Houston, which is where I went to high school and everything like that. And I was in a meeting. I forget the name of the group. It was Net Squared or something along those lines, and as well as a legal hackers group. And so it was all happening around the same time. And so since I was there was a lot of kind of legal talent available, and I was there as like the token tech guy. So I was how can we? And I kind of brought it up as one of they were talking about what are different projects that can be worked on from a public service point of view, and that was my suggestion. Why not something that can solve this problem? And this was at this point post Trump's election, so I think at that point everybody was kind of seeing in a much more stark light kind of the racial injustices when you have someone who's at the highest position who is more or less, a mouthpiece for white supremacy. I think it focuses people's minds in a way that doesn't happen when you have like up. Obama.
Right.
It's a lot harder to just be like, oh, everything's fine. So when I brought that up, people were very interested in it, and I kind of started working with. There was a group there that was really wanted to work with me on it, and so we started meeting. We started talking about it, and things just grew from there. So the Tubman Project is a project to build an open source artificial intelligence public defender.
Yes. Now I'm laughing because when I think most people, a lot of people, when we hear artificial intelligence, it really is like, it still is like movie stuff and,
Right.
Will Smith with guns and, robots. And so tell us a little bit about artificial intelligence. What is it?
So it doesn't necessarily mean, the whole thing of like her or Hal or like that type of thing where it's this embodied, voice or whatever that has its own consciousness and is trying to, that's not necessarily what I mean when I say intelligence. Intelligence purely is, the ability to solve a problem, right? If you put a task in front of whatever this thing is, it has the ability to find a way to accomplish that goal.
Okay.
And that could be identifying, the difference between being in a lane or not in a lane if you're a car, right? It could be the difference between saying, okay, is this picture a picture of a cat or is it a picture of a dog? All of those things are things that can be solved by intelligence that is not necessarily conscious.
Gotcha.
So that's more where I'm aiming. And so the idea of an artificial intelligence public defender is really tools that allow people to become much more effective at particular tasks because a lot of that intelligence is kind of embodied into a machine or an algorithm or what have you.
Okay.
One of the big things is you can see, there was a Mother Jones article that I like to point people to, but it shows just the disparity in the amount of funding that's given to the different parts of our legal system, right? And you can see a clear, massive, growth in the spending of, incarceration and prisons and everything like that. You see a massive growth in the spending for police officers, law enforcement, massive growth for district attorneys, state's attorneys, and things like that. And then you see a flat, dead line for public defense, where no funding has really been put into that. And it's not really that hard to see if you understand how our system works and how it intertwines with capitalism. There's no money in keeping people out of jail. You know what I mean? It just doesn't have anything that anybody who is a part of the system can benefit from, right? Like you don't go and get elected as a public defender. You kind of can now. The politics have changed as people have become more aware. But for the vast majority of time, you can't go and say, oh, I'm going to make sure that we don't have too many people in jail. That's not an electable thing. You can't, as a business person, you don't necessarily make any money off of just people running around. But if you have those people imprisoned and they can work for you for pennies, well, now you've got a cash cow. You know what I mean? So because of just these confluence of just the incentives, the incentives guide our system to put as many people in jail as possible. And unfortunately, in this country, it's all too easy to see anybody with darker skin with a stigma naturally, So any situation where there's any kind of conflict, any kind of altercation or what have you, you're going to have a more negative opinion about a person who has dark skin than someone who has light skin. And so that ends up with more of these people being funneled into jail.
Wow, yeah.
And now you have, police officers, whether they're in schools, whether they're in, all of these different places that just become funnels for this system. And it ends up feeding something that becomes a vicious cycle, because now you have private prisons where people are making money off of how many bodies they have in there.
A lot of money.
Tons of money.
Yeah.
They have, to the point where they have statistics around recidivism, where how they're bringing people back. It's like, oh yeah, once we get them, they're going to be back. We have permanent workers for life. We have permanent income for life. You know what I mean? For the life of this person. And that's their incentive, rather than, in many other places around the world where their thought is, okay, we want this person to become a citizen again.
Right. It's a passive income stream.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So the Tubman Project, how does that stop that?
So we want to stop this at the source. We want to prevent people who are innocent from being put into the system in the first place. And a lot of times what happens is, because legal defense is not free, it does have a cost. If you're coming into it in a situation where you don't have any money, you don't have any resources, whether that's social, financial, whatever, you end up going through that system just by virtue of being tagged, just from being pointed to. You have no defense, and so you just end up getting pushed through. And there's a number of different ways this happens, and there are very clear disparities in how this works. I mean, prime example, we just have Paul Manafort, right? Extremely wealthy man, extremely powerful man, has all these different crimes attributed to him, gets 4 years. Whereas you have a situation where I was seeing a woman who tried to get her child into a school.
Right.
She wanted her child to go to a better school, so she put him in a district where she didn't live, and she gets years of prison for that.
Right.
Decades.
Right. We actually see these. It's anecdotal, but you see instance after instance after. I mean, it keeps happening. So
Yeah.
it's anecdotal, but we can see the disparity.
Yeah, it's statistical also.
Right.
Like when those studies are done, it's very easy to see. It's very, very easy to see how disparate it is. So it's something where you can't fix everything, but this is something where I felt if you could make public defenders effective enough that they could handle their caseload effectively, right? That by itself would be a huge improvement.
And so is that what this project does? Can you very quickly explain how it actually works, how this artificial intelligence helps a public defender do this?
So what we do is we have an open source project. We go to different actors within the legal system, whether that is, we have some DAs that are friendly with us, we have, even in some cases, police officers that are friendly with us. We talk to a lot of public defenders around the country. We talk to a lot of people who have gone through the legal system and try to figure out where the holes are, From there, we try to determine, okay, from that information, what can we build to help solve some of these problems? So prime example, we had a hackathon in Boston, Massachusetts, where we went and we had a set of challenges that were based around some of these holes that we have found within the legal defense system. So one of those was video processing, right? Nowadays, everybody has cameras, whether it's security cameras, you've got cameras on your phone, you've got body cams now. All of that now becomes part of discovery. all of that now becomes part of evidence that a lawyer needs to go and sift through to try and figure out how they can defend their client, right? So if you have a massive team that you can work with that can go through all of this data, that's great for you. You know, you can go through it and you can find whatever you need to find. If you're already overburdened, you have no real way to be able to facilitate actually finding what you need through that.
Right.
So one of the projects that we had during that hackathon was a video analysis tool. And so within 24 hours, one of the teams that was competing was able to build a tool that could pull all of the data from that video file, mark out the points that were important, you know, find the parts like maybe there was a lot of change here, maybe there was a lot of motion here, maybe this is too still, whatever the case may be. Find the parts that are important, pick out what's happening in these scenes. So if there's a person here, it can mark that. If there's, you know, a gun appears on the screen, it can mark that. And put all that output into a set of files so that someone who is trying to go through this can now have points where they need to pay attention, right? So that's just one example of how you can use a machine learning algorithm to really speed up that process and make an attorney more effective.
Yeah,
Right.
it's fantastic how you're thinking ahead. And I love the idea of having this whole new generation of people who actually get the technology and they understand how that works, thinking about this issue and how they can apply what they know to curb this trend that's been going on forever.
Absolutely.
So I just think that's amazing. I think it's amazing. I want to check in with Chuka. We check in to see what he's thinking about this. And Chuka's of your generation, and I think he's tech savvy. What are you thinking about the Tubman Project?
For me, I think it makes a lot of sense really taking a look at the structure of a particular system. And again, you mentioned like the incentives as well. And going from that point and trying to focus on how can I incorporate what the incentives are within the system to create a solution that will, that will work against the biases of this system. So it makes a lot of sense employing technology, employing the history of that system, employing a lot of the making use of a lot of the practical stories from public defenders and their clientele to create some sort of solution to help the problem of the overuse of prisons in this country.
Yeah, I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Darrell, are you a futurist or an activist, or both?
I'd like to say I'm a little bit of both. Activism to me is, I'll say I'm a little jaded on that sometimes. I did have my time where I, was about protesting, was about, and even, I testified before the state Congress before and things like that. I don't have really any faith in our political system, to be honest with you, which is changing, actually. Post the 2016 election, I was actually just at an event maybe last weekend, where it was hosted by one of the newer judges that got elected during 2016. So it was Lena Hidalgo for Harris County. Did a massive kind of civic Saturday where she brought a lot of people who were interested in trying to make improvements to the criminal justice system to try and see what could be done there. And so seeing things like that where you have people get elected who do try and push and shake things up, it does give me a little bit of hope. I'm not convinced that the system will allow real change to happen. I mean, if we're going to be real about it, we do exist in an oligarchy. That means money gives you power. Power does not come just from being a citizen, unfortunately.
I think we're realizing that more and more with each cycle, how important the role money and having that money plays in getting elected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for me, when I think of activism, I'm thinking about how do you change the power dynamics, right? And so you can do that by, getting resources from and, altering where those resources are going. And you can also do that with, knowledge. Technology is one of those resources, right? And so I like the idea. One of the big reasons that I wanted to do this as an open source project was for that exact reason, was to make sure that that knowledge does not stay siloed, does not stay controlled by too few hands, right? Right now we have a few big companies that are really pushing in terms of artificial intelligence that basically own all of the data, that exists in this world, have complete control over it, to the point where we can't even really know what's going on in our elections unless we ask Mark Zuckerberg. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that's the world we live in now.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's very important to have a lot of this stuff become more open, to have this stuff become more exposed to the public, because that knowledge needs to be spread. And there needs to be part of civic responsibility, part of being able to inspect the systems that we operate within. In the future is going to mean being able to inspect these algorithms that are running our lives. And that can only be done if they're open. That can only be done if the algorithms that are being used in all of these different places are available for people to inspect. Because that knowledge, you can learn how to read code. You know what I mean? Not everybody's going to do it, but the people that do it and have that civic mindset will be able to see things as long as they're out in the open, and will be able to pick out, where some of these issues are from a systemic basis, as these algorithms, which, believe me, are already a big part of our criminal justice system. I was actually, one of the things that's going on in Boston, they have, it's called the Hal Project. So this is basically looking at how artificial intelligence can be humanized within the criminal justice system. So for example, if you have an algorithm that a judge is using for sentencing, is there bias in that algorithm? And this is something that's already happening. We
It's
already
called
have
the
courts.
Hal Project.
Hal Project, H-A-L.
H-A-L. Okay.
Yeah, and this is run out of MIT, and they're one of the groups that is inspecting these algorithms that are being used.
Yeah, see, I can't speak for all the world, even though I would like to sometimes. When I hear words like algorithm, AI, for me, I'm so far removed from those things. When I get online, I'm just, I may post something and wonder, why has no one liked this yet? And then you hear someone mention algorithms. Never in a million years would I have ever applied algorithms to criminal justice and helping certain groups of people. So I am, I think it's fantastic, and I want to do a lot of reading up. Your website is so full of information. What's the goal? What would be your dream state for this project?
My dream state, I would love to have this be a project that, I mean, the end goal is I want to reduce the cost of access to justice, right? That's kind of the overall mission of what we're doing. I also want to be able to have a way to hold the system accountable, So even though our main focus is on development of technology and software and things like that, we're also working on a system of making the court data that exists within the country more exposed to the public, right? Right now, every county has their own system. Some of it's all paper. You can't really get to it without, FOIA requests and all kinds of things like that.
Right.
I would like to make that become exposed, partially because, yes, it will help in terms of building, machine learning algorithms that can read from that data. But there are also other groups in the country that use this as well. So Measures for Justice, for example, is trying to look at that data to hold different parts of the justice system accountable. I'd like to be able to hold even individuals accountable. So you can see if this particular judge is, for example, situations like where you have that one judge that was literally selling children into slavery using his position as a judge, that can be exposed if that data is visible.
Accessible. Right.
So I think that's another big part of it, is just bringing more accountability in general. And if there comes to a point where you can have that system where a person can have tools available to themselves to be able to defend themselves, with the help of a counselor, or even on their own, pro se. That's eventually what I want to be able to provide.
Well, we will be following this. I think it's phenomenal. It's just an idea that is, phenomenal. What do you need to? It sounds like you've got a good handle on the information. You've done your research. All that's here. You're traveling. You're having these hackathons. You said. What do you need to help you with this project?
Right now, our big goal for this year is we want to start a fellowship. So we're looking to have open source developers that are working on the project kind of year round, or even if it's on a semester to semester basis or what have you. So we're looking for people who want to be a part of that fellowship, whether as applicants, if you're interested in learning about machine learning and applying that in the real world. Maybe you're a student who's in school for this, or whatever the case may be. Or even if you're working for a company and you want to maybe have some other work that you're doing outside of that. So that is a big thing. And as well, anybody who is willing to sponsor those types of programs, that would be a big help for us. So if you go to our site, tubmanproject.com/fellowship, you can learn more about our efforts there. But that would be a huge help to keeping our project sustainable and making sure that we're able to continue development of these tools.
Well, Darrell, I think it's amazing. I think that you're doing great work. And I urge everyone to visit this website, read through the information, see what's there, know what's happening in the criminal justice system. We watch TV and movies and series and Law and Order, and we get this idea of what happens, but the figures are there. Those numbers I read off at the beginning, those are real. So visit this website, learn about this project, and if you can help or contribute in any way, do so. Thank you for watching this episode of Brainstorm Black. We'll see you next time.